Welcome to this webinar on the topic of our extended Scara portfolio. It has actually been quite a long time since we did this webinar out of KUKA Nordic at all, and it has been even a longer time since we spoke about our Scara robots. Last time was actually November 21, and then we introduced reintroduced the Scara KUKA robots with two new products, the KR6 in two different reaches. And since then, we've actually had a huge success with our Scara robots. And because of that and the market demand, we have greatly expanded the portfolio, which we'll look at shortly. But I will actually start with a small flashback and show you a video of these Scara robots, which was relevant then in 21, but it is actually equally relevant today because these two products are still alive.
Intelligenz.
Yeah, so perhaps you do remember that video from then, and it is, as I said, still relevant today, as relevant. But since then, a few things has happened to our portfolio, and that's what I call this webinar for the Scara expanded portfolio. Since then, we have introduced two new Scara robot series. the KR12 and the KR20. And as you might imagine, we are now talking about 12 and 20 kilo of robots. And one common question is, what does actually Scara stands for? Well, it is a complicated acronym. It is Selective Compliance Assembly Robot Arm, which is a very fancy way of saying a 4-axis robot. Let's talk a little bit about the basics around a Scara robot before we dive into the technical details of the new generations. Let's have a look at the naming convention of our robots. So KR stands for KUKA robot, which you probably already know. And 12 is the payload of the robots. The next part of the name is the R750, which is the reach of the robot from the base to the tool center points. And finally, which differs the Scara robots from our standard robots, is then the Z specification, which is the stroke in the vertical direction, as you see in the picture below, in this case 340 millimeters. And then we sometimes also build on variants of the same robots, like for example CR, which stands for clean room, and there are a few of these variants which we will look at shortly. On a Scara robot, there are 4 axes, as I mentioned. There is the A1, which is around the base. The second joint is then the A2. The vertical movement of the tool is called axis 3 and is usually built around some kind of screw application. And then, in order that we don't want to turn around the workpiece we're handling while we're going up and down, there is a rotational function of the axis 3 as well, so we can keep the product still during its movements. And that makes a Scara robot given almost fully circular movement of the range. But as you see, there are some, it cannot turn fully around axis 1, so we have some restrictions directly behind of the robot. We do reach behind the robot, but not the full reach. Why and when should you use a Scara robot? Well, Scara robots are significant in one order. They are really compact. They require very little space in their movement and therefore become very effective. They are also very fast and precise in their movements. They are actually the fastest robots we do have in our portfolio. There is sometimes a standard cycle described when it comes to small robotics. And that standard cycle is that you pick up one load, move it upwards 25 millimeters, then 305 millimeters across and go down 25 millimeters, and then do the exact same thing backwards. That is a standard cycle. And for these, the fastest of our Scara robots, which is the smallest one, can do this in 0.36 seconds, which is really, really fast. That's almost 3 times a second. But they are also very cost effective. Not only compact, they are also very cost effective. Since they are only 4 axes, they are usually a bit cheaper than a 6-axis robot as well. And just as any robot, they adhere to the same safety standards as any robot do. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we have had since some years the KR6 in 2 variants. A year and a half ago, we actually introduced the KR12 series. And that is available with 3 different reaches, 650, 750, and 850 millimeters. But there is also, and they have a pretty large Z-stroke, 400 millimeters compared to their smaller siblings. But there is even a special variant, a KR12, with a reach of 750 with a Z-stroke of 600 millimeters, which is pretty unique on the market today. That actually means that the Z-stroke can go well below the foot of the robot. For example, reaching down into a box to place or pick objects. So there are 4 variants of the KR12, as I mentioned, but that's not all, because in the same way, there is a clean room class of the KR12. And what differs the clean room class from the standard robots? Well, basically 2 objects, or 3. You might notice that the Z-stroke is a little bit shorter than the standard robot here. And that is because to be able to fulfill the clean room class, we need to cover the axis, the vertical axis fully. And that costs us a little bit of stroke length. It is an IP54 covered robot, and it fulfills the ISO classification of level 5 in the clean room classes, which usually is more than required in the electronics or battery assembly situations. This is the data sheets, but at the end of the webinar, you will get a link to where you can download the models, the data sheets, if you want to have more technical details around the robots itself. And of course, we do have a video describing these as well. So let's have a look at that one.
Industrial intelligence.
Yeah. The funny thing is with these videos is that I actually show everything I'm going to talk about mostly. So let's see here. You should be able to see my screen again. What has happened here again is that we do have a pretty long stroke in this, and that there is a quite long reach here. What has happened this spring and summer is that we have had, as I mentioned at the beginning, an even larger Scara robot, the Scara KR20, which is also available in 3 variants with different reaches, up to 1200 millimeters with a Z-stroke of 450 millimeters. Now, these are just figures on the paper, but think about it a little bit. A reach of 1200 millimeters is quite a long reach for a Scara robot. That actually, for example, covers a full pallet if you set the robot next to the pallet, which makes this robot very flexible and very useful. And in the same way as with the Scara 12, in this series, there are also a clean room variants with the same reach, but with a slightly shorter Z stroke, but otherwise IP54 and ISO clean room class 5, the same as at the KR12 clean room. That, and here again are the data sheets, which you will, as I mentioned before, have a link to at the end of the webinar. So I won't go into these details, all of them, except to see that here is this cycle speed, and you will also see the repeatability, which is quite good actually. So here we have them again, but this is actually not all the news I'm going to talk about today, because we've also been gifted with 2 variants of what we call the hygienic oil robots. One KR6 with a 700 reach and 170 millimeter stroke, and one KR13 with a reach of 850 and a stroke of 340 millimeters. And these are called HO robots, hygienic oil robots. That means that they are specially adapted to be used within the food and medical industry, where you have special requirements on such things as oils, coatings of the robots, and so on. And of course, also type class, IP class, which is IP54 of these. So 2 variants, especially adapted to the demands of the food industry and medical industry as well. That means that they are also fulfilling the FDA standards within food and medical. That actually gives us that 3 years ago we had 2 robots in our product portfolio. Right now we have 17 variants. And actually we have almost had a market share worldwide of our Scara robots with around 25%. And that is thanks to all of you. Let's have a look. You saw this on the video before, but it is important to point out that there is a lot of connections on these robots. At the base of the robot, there are electrical and Ethernet connections, but also direct connections for air couplings. Which goes to the top of the robot internally within the 12 and 20 kilo robots. On the 6 kilo robots, that was in an outside hose, but on the 12 and 6 kilos, you actually get these couplings built into the interior of the robots, which again decreases the space requirements quite significantly. Now, when you order your first Scara robot, what is included in that delivery? Well, of course, the robot itself, the controller, the KRC5 Micro, and it should be pointed out that regardless of which Scara robot you do use, it is supplied with a KRC5 Micro, which is a very compact and useful controller with, for example, built-in IOs on it centrally as well. Of course, you get an operating system in that controller, which we call KSS 8.7, which is the latest and the greatest of the operating systems we do have, and it uses the same robot language as all of our 6-axis robots. And of course, you also get a smart pendant, what we call smart pad, the operator device, which you can use for both programming and operation of the robot. But this is not everything you get. You get a fully fledged production center, actually, because you also get an asset on your personal My KUKA webpage when you log in there. Your robot, your specific robot, will be registered to you, and you can follow the history of that robot. You can get the documentation for that robot and the softwares included directly on your page with an easy access, which will save you time. But even further, there is a function built into all of our robots today, which is called IQOT. IQOT is a tool for optimizing, fault tracing, and predictive maintenance. This is a function built into the robot without any additional costs, which you need to activate on your robot. But it comes built in from the beginning. And finally, these are robots which are Industry 4.0 connected. That means that they are open for communication with any system in your network. It is prepared for a simulation environment or a digital twin environment. You do have offline programming possibilities well built into our KUKA Sim software, which allows you to build up your cell and station virtually and do the real safe programming of the robot and the safety configuration directly in the virtual world and just download it directly to the robot. And last but not least, it is also AI enabled. AI is a special topic which we will dive into later this autumn. But AI already today has the possibility to dramatically increase your programming and deployment of the robot, but also do predictive maintenance or predictive maintenance warnings for you. This will be a real game changer into our industry. And of course, there are option softwares. These are just 3 of them, but these are commonly used options together with our Scara robots. Vision Tech, which is a 2D camera to find the placement and the orientation of pieces to pick or place, which can, if you want, be combined with the software Conveyor Tech. And Conveyor Tech is our software to synchronize the robot movements with moving conveyor belts, so that we pick and place objects at the exact right speed of what that conveyor belt is moving. The third one you see here, Pick Control, is a software which you find useful if these fast movements of the Scara robots are still not enough. So you will need to divide the load between several robots to pick the objects from a conveyor belt, for example. That is a software which will then automatically share the load between 2 or several robots. It's difficult to share one robot, of course. This pretty much brings us to the end of my webinar. And I'm now open for your questions. Just to get you started, I've actually listed a few questions that are quite common, like how do I get my Scara robots up and running? Well, it is actually quite fast and simple to get your Scara robot up and running. And if you follow this QR code, you will actually get to an instructional video which will show you how to set it up and get it running. Another question is, can I simulate my complete production within Scara robots? And again, that is where we use KUKA Sim. Sim enables you to test your environment. It allows you to make sure that you are not colliding in any situation in your layout. And it is a lot cheaper to collide in the virtual world than in the real world. And you can then actually test the complete logical sequence, not only from your robot, but from your complete station, and then download it directly to the robots. And speaking of PLCs or outside controls outside of the robots, usually the robots are connected to the PLC, and our robots, including the Scara robots, do support all common field buses: Profinet, Ethernet IP, name it. But also the safe variants of these buses. So we can talk Profinet Safe, FSOE, Ethernet IP Safe as well. There are also software packages which helps us do this integration. One of them is called AppTech, which is really useful when you do your engineering. It includes a toolbox which will shorten your development time dramatically. The other one is called MX Automation, which allows you to do the robot movement programming inside of an external controller, like a PLC, for example. In some cases, that could be quite useful. So I went through these 3 questions in hope of getting you started. I can't see any questions in the question field yet. Either I've put you all to sleep or I've been totally cryptic and can't be understood at all. There are still no questions there. Then I will hope that I've been clear enough. And before I leave, I promise you some links that you will have these QR codes as you will get the videos in your email, or a link to the videos quite shortly. And I put up 5 links here. So the first link takes you to the Scara webpage on KUKA's homepage. There you will get an overview of our Scara robots and a lot of application examples in which type of applications and industry are the Scara really useful. The second link is to the My KUKA webpage, where you will get the technical details of the robot. You can download specifications, manuals, or CAD models of the Scara robot. That webpage actually requires a login but if you don't have one, you just have to register. It's of course free of charge. The third link is to an online tool we call load.kuka.com, which is a calculation tool where you can enter the load data of the load you are planning to handle, and that tool will verify that a specific robot can handle that exact load, and if it can't, it has the ability to suggest another robot for you. So you make sure that you have a load that fits onto that robot. The fourth link is to our KUKA Sim page on My KUKA, where you can read about the capabilities of KUKA Sim, but even better, you can download a free trial version which will work for you during 30 days, together with a getting started document. In 3 hours, you will be fully fledged up and running with this robot in KUKA Sim. And the fifth link, and the last one this time, is a link to our IQOT information. This IQOT again is the built-in asset management system, but it's not just an asset management system. Here you can online monitor your robot, get the alarms of a robot, see the health of the robot, get and plan preemptive maintenance for your robot. This is an online tool which connects your robot to the cloud, and you will get all the production data out of your robot or robots in one web page. A functionality which sits in the robot, you only need to activate it. Don't miss in to look into that. And with that, we are at the end. you will get this video afterwards, but it will also be on our KUKA Nordic playlist, where there are tons of old webinars and other useful stuff already there. With this, you have my email address there because the questions might show up once this webinar is over. Thank you very much.
Industrial intelligence.